Hello, everyone. Welcome to Transform Now. I'm Brad Hairston,
And I'm Michael Marchuk.
and this is the weekly pulse check where we take a look at what's happening in the world of AI and automation. And Michael, I've got 6 articles for you today. I hit you with a
Bring them
sensational-
on. 6.
Yes, and the first one is the one I added most recently because it's hot off the press. This one comes from Adweek. It's titled OpenAI hires Slack CEO as revenue officer. So we are talking about Denise Dresser, who until yesterday was the CEO of Slack. That's a pretty big role. And OpenAI has poached her away to be the CRO. And this comes at a very interesting time as the company is entering what most consider to be their most financially turbulent stretch yet, because they're forecasting 74. Get this, Michael. They're forecasting 74 billion in operating losses by 2028, which is nearly 75% of their projected revenue. So the money keeps flowing out the door, and profitability is still a bit of a pipe dream, but maybe Denise Dresser can make a difference. What do you think?
My goodness, I hope she can help, because this is, if you tried running a business like this, it wasn't related to AI or the top AI model, you would be laughed out the door. No investor would ever want to just keep dumping money into a company that continues to lose a lot of cash. So obviously,
No doubt.
coming up with these frontier models is very expensive. You're at the bleeding edge of everything here. So she's definitely going to have her work cut out for her. I'm guessing Denise is going to try to figure out how best to get tap into the enterprise market, because you can only sell so many $20 subscriptions, and those are not going to cut it. So we'll see what she does as she goes towards some of the big businesses out there, to see if how they want to leverage OpenAI's technologies, with maybe a little bit more of a profit margin built into it, perhaps. Yeah, this is going to be interesting.
No report on what she paid to come over, but must have been a lot if she left a CEO job to come become the CRO at OpenAI. No doubt she's her wallet's a little thicker than it was before.
Well, she also worked quite a bit at Salesforce, so she's got some really, really good background in terms of the organization she's been with. So I'm hoping that as she makes that transition over to OpenAI, she could bring some of that rigor, and some of the targets that perhaps they can hit then. So we'll see what happens.
Yes, indeed. Okay, next article in the world of M&A, IBM. This is from Finance Yahoo Finance, that is. And the title is IBM Accelerates Cloud Drive with $11 billion Confluent deal as AI demand booms. So IBM just dropped $11 billion to acquire what is considered to be one of the leading companies in real-time data streaming. They have a cloud platform that facilitates that. And the angle here, Michael, is that as AI agents become more autonomous, they need live data flowing constantly. They can't deal with batch processing delays or any hindrance in that area. IBM's essentially buying the infrastructure layer for agentic AI. That's kind of the way you can look at this. So what do you think? Was this a smart move on their behalf, or was it a panic buy? What do you think?
I don't think it was a panic buy. But if we start looking at across the landscape, we just talked about OpenAI. You also got the likes of Amazon and Microsoft and Oracle. I mean, the list is pretty deep when you talk about some of the big players that are doing similar things with their infrastructure buys and their infrastructure development. You have to play at that level really to have that kind of scale so that you can get enterprises to trust who you are. Most people trust IBM, but they aren't necessarily the bleeding edge as they used to be. So as we start looking at how their acquisition structure is moving, I think they're approaching this more cautiously. So I don't think this is panic in any sense, but I do think it's something that they had to do or have to do to be able to be competitive with the likes of AWS and others who are aggressively expanding into that territory. So one of the things that IBM does have on its side, that others do as well, but certainly when you think of IBM, you do think of enterprise, kind of bulletproof enterprise kind of software and hardware. And I think that's where they want to live. They want to stay in this regulated environment where things have to be they just have to be bulletproof. And when we start seeing issues like the Cloudflare outage that affects major swaths of the internet, they understand that, hey, listen, we are IBM. We have to be different. We have to be more enterprise grade to prevent these kinds of things from happening. Not that they couldn't happen to them as well. But the idea is that that's where they play. They play a lot in these very heavily regulated environments. So going into this, some of the benefit they get from doing the Confluent deal is they get this, some regulatory resilience built into this whole infrastructure that they're buying. So I think it's a good buy for them. And I think it's going to help them be more competitive. And we know how IBM does, interlace its purchases relatively quickly with the rest of their product line. So we'll see how this kind of folds together to become more of an IBM offering.
Yeah, this is the latest in a series of infrastructure investments that we've seen from all the big tech companies. To me, this is IBM saying, we're not competing on LLMs, we're competing on operational infrastructure. We want that data to be flowing. We want these agents to have all they need. Data is not going to be the major obstacle. So I agree with you. I think it's a smart investment. They have the money to do it. By the way, they paid a 10x multiple on Confluent's revenue, which we have seen that before as well. The multiples on these AI companies is astronomical. Interesting news there with IBM. Okay, moving on. Next article from VentureBeat. Amazon's new AI can code for days without human help. What does this mean for software engineers?
It's the end. So, run for the hills.
Run for the hill. So we're talking about systems that can build and debug complex software while developers, while they're sleeping, I guess. This feels a little bit like an inflection point, for what we've been talking about, for what autonomous really means. And I don't know, what do you think about this when you hear this article, when you read this article, Michael? What are your thoughts?
So again, they're very clear as they go through this in terms of the human involvement in the development cycle. And this simply brings another set of tools that let these developers be more efficient with their time and be able to do some interesting kind of development that would have taken much longer with maybe larger teams, but now they can help reduce that. So the idea behind this is that there's these frontier agents that they allow them to do, as you mentioned earlier, work on a specific task for quite a long time. So they can actually figure things out rather than some of the current coding copilots where you give it very specific requests and it creates a specific thing for you, a specific set of code for you that you can then review and debug on your own, or if it doesn't work, have to ask it again. This will let you go to the opposite direction, say, and provide a more broad prompt with the expectations and allow these frontier agents to even spawn multiple copies of themselves to come up with the quote unquote right answer, or come up with code that will operate the way you have instructed it to. Now, obviously, this is not a set it and forget it type of thing, at least not yet. where code is developed, and then based on that, it's then brought back to the developer, human developers, for them to review, understand, and then finally check in to be production ready. So this can save a boatload of time for developers who are really going out to create more complex types of code. It also understands, which is something that current co-pilots don't, the interactions between other components within there. So if you're developing for a microservices architecture, these agents then can understand what implications there might be on changes to the code in one area to the microservices that are developed in a different area, and then suggest code changes for that as well. So it does give you a much broader viewpoint of how you're running a project. So I think that's really important to know. But the idea is that, humans are still at this point in charge of what code is being developed, and the final output is then, authorized, if you will, for production by humans.
Well, the engineers who survive changes like this, they've got to have the ability to govern and direct these coding agents. There's still going to be a role there. I think it's
a bigger role. It's a bigger role, because it's one thing to be an excellent code developer. It's another thing to help to design and provide guidance for junior developers. And generally speaking, that's something that happens later in your career as you get more comfortable with the code yourself. So this could be difficult for some developers to make a transition, only because, not because they can't understand the code, but they don't necessarily understand the implications of guiding other developers, in this case, AI developers, to create a broader context for that particular code set.
Yeah. One question it does raise in my mind, Michael, is if AI is going to be coding for maybe days unsupervised, what happens and who's accountable when it introduces vulnerabilities into the system? I mean, it certainly forces more, focus around agent governance frameworks. Those are not.
It does.
I mean, they're mandatory when you talk about this kind of thing.
The other thing too is, honestly, as part of it, there is a potential that the AI could uncover vulnerabilities that a human coder wouldn't necessarily see because of the insights it has between the data and the other components. So it's possible that it can help avoid some of those kinds of things that might have initially slipped through to production, because it does understand the interplays. But it does make it difficult. The other thing too that I thought was, coming back to this is great, from a generic standpoint. Hey, let the AI do its thing. But when it comes to cost containment, it's one thing to say, hey, listen, let AI do everything, and it spawns off 10 versions of itself and it works for days. What kind of bill are you going to get at the end of that several days of coding for some code that you've never seen before? It just shows up and here's the bill. So there needs to be some serious review on how those kinds of systems are allowed to consume resources.
Yeah. Well, let's take things to another level. Let's go to an HS review article next. And this one is titled, "What's Lost When We Work with AI, According to Neuroscience." So HBR recently published research showing that working with AI actually weakens our pattern recognition and our creative thinking over time. So we're gaining productivity, but we're trading off cognitive skills that make us valuable in the first place. What do you think about this, Michael?
I don't know. Let me ask my AI to tell me what I'm supposed to say. I think this is part of the problem.
Put on your Google glasses, your Meta glasses, and just read a response to me as you're talking.
I do believe that's part of it, is that leveraging AI has been really, really helpful in developing content and developing new ideas. because you're having people who are now asking different types of questions as they're prompting and then reprompting and revising the prompts that they're asking these AIs to kind of develop on their behalf. The challenge they have, and this is something that we've seen in a couple different areas, is that the way that your mind works changes based on how you're using it. So we've seen this in like senior decline in cognitive abilities. When you stop being active and leveraging your brain to do things, it naturally declines because you're not working it out anymore. And I think this is the same thing we're seeing here with this, is if we're handing off the responsibilities, well, just come up with this for me, AI. I'll prompt you something and you tell me, and now I can evaluate. There's a couple things you have issues with. One is it may offer some interesting concepts, but you really don't have that same kind of aha moment that you would have if you're working collaboratively with another human as you're working through the same types of issues, where perhaps you could be as creative, if not more so, in coming up with some interesting ideas that really encompass more of the implications of those particular ideas. We start talking about the code and such. As I was thinking through that, I thought about the cost implications of developing this. Whereas if I simply asked AI, what do you think of this? They would say, what a wonderful thing it is to be able to be more productive and offer that sort of thing. So getting your brain around the broader implications is something that humans are really good at if you continue to use those kinds of brain power muscles, right? If you let them go, you end up outsourcing, if you will, your creativity, which then makes us all less creative, honestly.
Yeah. This was a kind of a fascinating read. I mean, it's the first time I've seen, an institution like Harvard that, where a lot of AI inspiration and innovation has occurred. It's the first time I've seen a group like that come back and say, hey, AI is not about augmentation. It's about AI substitution of, our own innately human skills, our cognitive development. And
if you let it,
that's a great point. So I didn't take it as a wholesale condemnation of AI. I took it as more of we need to think about the way we're upskilling people. We need to make sure we train people to prevent them from becoming over-reliant on AI and getting lazy and letting their creativity diminish. I take it overall as more of a watch out, kind of a warning flag to organizations that, hey, AI can have this effect. The neuroscience supports it, but you just have to make sure you don't let that happen. And you really do bake into your programs, bake into your training, your upskilling, the right things that are going to help people learn to be even more effective in this world where AI is playing such a big role.
Well, beyond that, you also have some social implications that we've already seen with social media, where interaction between people becomes something that happens through a screen or is cut off altogether. Especially when we start talking, I'm going to interact with my AI agent or my AI platform. I'm going to be, suggesting a prompt, responding back, and there's that dialogue, if you will, between you and the AI platform. It completely short circuits any other external activity. So you and I don't talk anymore. I don't speak with another human about these things. Even if that's quote unquote less efficient, there could be some interesting outcomes that happen when you have interplay between actual people. And that's probably the biggest thought that I have on this, is that, yes, we may lose some brain power if we outsource this thing, but more likely than not, we're also going to lose a lot more of the social interaction that's already declining. And by losing that interaction, we also lose the capability of understanding what's really important. So there's a lot of cautions in this, and I appreciate their approach to, kind of exposing these things.
Yeah. So we talked about upskilling. That's the focus of our next article. Comes from McKinsey, and they wrote a piece called or titled "Redefine AI Upskilling as a Change Imperative." So here McKinsey is making the case that upskilling is not a training problem, it's a change management problem, meaning you can't just throw courses at people. You really need wholesale organizational transformation. So they're making this, you might say they're making this kind of a make or break issue for AI adoption. What resonated with you here, Michael, as you read this article?
Well, you know, I'm a big fan of culture change within an organization as we adopt any kind of technology, but certainly within AI, there is a massive culture change that has to take place. And the way they approach it is they say, hey, leaders need to adopt and embrace this stuff first. And that way they can understand that they have to understand, but they can understand how that's going to impact the people that are within the organization. It's one thing to say, well, you know, do grassroots thing. I'm going to continue planning and moving forward with the current set of understanding that I, as an executive, have. But maybe we come up with something grassroots, and then I can evaluate that within my limited framework of understanding of what that technology can do. That can be harmful in terms of the adoption and the eventual efficiencies and or new creative options that get opened up for that business unit, because the executives don't fully understand what they're getting themselves into. So the way McKinsey approached it is, as they said, hey, listen, our leaders are going to take this and they're going to adopt it first and encourage their the model adoption throughout their organization. That helps set the tone. So you're setting the culture that this is okay and this is encouraged. We want you to learn this stuff. We want you to understand this. And there's benefits that go along with it. The benefits, though, as we talk about culture, have to get connected to some kind of incentive. You know, yes, it's great for the company. Hooray, we're thrilled that the company's able to produce more. But as a human being, where do I fit within this broader scheme of things? You know, how is this beneficial for me as an employee? Where do I get incentives associated with the way I leverage these new tools in this new culture so that we can continue to reinforce that over time? Because it's one thing to get the first burst, but it's another thing to keep that going over a long period of time. So I think that's, sustaining the change was one of their big challenges as part of this. It's one thing to get the quick wins early. It's that maintaining the culture change, which really does then last much longer than a simple program or project would when you're doing the adoption. So
Yeah.
AI upskilling is a continual thing. It's not going to stop, as you and I both know. It continues to happen. The change happens frequently, and sometimes it's more revolutionary than the other, depending on which week you're on. But we have to learn that this culture change of transformation needs to get built in, because that's the era we're living in now.
Yeah, no doubt. You know, the article makes a big point about psychological safety and how that's important to AI adoption. And I think I would just add to that, you also need compliance certainty. You know, Jesse Tutt and I talked about this in a recent podcast. Jesse, who runs the automation COE for a large healthcare system, yes, you need AI that is psychologically safe, but boy, it better be compliant. And if you're in a regulated industry, that is even more important, or equally important, I should say. So that's one piece they did really go into. We're really focused more on the psychological or the cultural aspect of it. So I don't blame them, but it's a interesting piece. I knew you would like it. That's why I chose it, because it's right up your alley. And we'll always find time for articles about, culture change or change management as it relates to the future of work. Okay, so let's move to our last article of the day. This is from the Data Scientist, and it's titled "Detecting AI Writing in the Age of Large Language Models. How Far Can Tech Go?" So this piece dives into the...
Wait, does it dive in, or does it delve in?
Delves. Let's say delve. Delve is a word used by hyper intelligent people like me. This piece delves into the kind of the cat and mouse game of detecting AI generated content. and spoiler alert here, but the detectors are losing. We're at maybe 80% accuracy at best, and it's only getting harder. So, the bigger question for me here is, what does it mean when we can't tell human from machine output anymore? What do you think, Michael?
So it goes well beyond writing, as you have no doubt seen with Sora and several other video generation tools. This is something that is happening now very, very quickly, where the tools and the training and the revisions to those models have made it much, much more difficult to tell if something is real or not real. And you have to look hard for clues on whether it is or not. So I would look at this and say, okay, it's interesting in that way, but let's look at why we would even care. I mean, when we start looking at AI generated text, who would be most interested to find out if text was human written or AI written? Likely someone who is in higher education, who's helping to craft someone's thought processes and minds going forward. And in my mind, as I look at this, there's a sort of a tone deafness to the tools that are being used in the real world, which are all AI related. So the likelihood that you're going to get out into a role after you graduate your college degree and it won't be using AI is getting lower and lower now, because AI adoption is becoming higher, even at a individual productivity level. But people have been exposed to it for a while now. So when it comes to this, what are we trying to do? Well, let's look back at the actual purpose of why you'd want to do that. It's how are you as a human thinking constructively, creatively? What kind of thought processes do you go through? And using an essay, if you will, within one of these kind of environments, educational environments, is a one way of testing your knowledge there. And this is nothing new. People have been plagiarizing for quite some time in their PhD theses, and they get found out, and people are all upset and up in arms because they plagiarized something. The reality is now that this plagiarism is coming through in a more automated way, becomes more difficult to justify. Okay, it's one thing if one person is trying to do this to get by because they're not really sure. It's another thing if a human is orchestrating these tools to be able to craft the argument that they're trying to make, and the output is something that comes from AI. So how do you approach that? What's a better way of doing that? Do we do oral exams where we talk about the problems and we have folks who are actually presenting information rather than simply writing it? That's one option. There's a bunch of other ways to get around to the actual heart of the matter, is like, do you know this? And tell me how you're thinking about it, rather than using a text analyzing program to understand whether or not this is 87% AI or not. And as we found too, that some of the way they look at the false positives become an issue, where a human actually wrote something and it's flagged as AI generated, being a negative thing. And all of a sudden, how do you prove something if you've written it,
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, this article, it just reinforced the idea that there's still this distrust of AI, right? We've moved from AI as a tool to AI as an imposter. And there's so much focus around, was this AI generated? And I clearly understand how in education, that's a big deal. We want students to think for themselves, to be creative, to show that they understand the content, the material they've been taught. I understand how in the legal industry, we don't want, we want to be able to decipher, and we don't want people citing fictitious cases and things like that some lawyers have done either voluntarily or involuntarily. But there are lots of places where it's perfectly acceptable for AI to provide content. And I don't think we have to bend over backwards to try to understand what is AI generated versus human generated. We've dealt with form letters from businesses for as long as civilization has existed, and we haven't necessarily been offended by that. I mean, it's just a creative, more finely tuned version of form writing that is more personalized and can communicate better. So yeah, AI took a beating today in our pulse check discussion, from Harvard to the detection. But yeah, there's still a positive side to it for sure. Well, that's all the time we have for this one. Thank you for joining us. Remember, we publish another podcast episode every week involving a guest, so be sure and check that out. And otherwise, we will see you back this time next week for the pulse check. Bye for now.